The oil change is the most basic of car maintenance, and for many years was something that I insisted I do myself. But as I had gotten old, fat, and lazy, and prices had gotten to the point that I wasn't really saving any money by doing it myself, I began to appreciate the quick lube oil change places, except when it came to classic cars. Most of them will even tell you they won't do classic cars. I've been told cut-off places as current as 1975. But recently, we had one of our newer cars in the place, and the guy said, "Oh, sure, we do classic cars." So I thought, okay, let's take one in and see what happens. So I took in my '59 Plymouth Belvedere, which is a relatively modern car. I mean, it's not like it's a flathead, and it has your standard power accessories attached to an early Chrysler A-Block V8. And the guys there were great sports. And except for one young gentleman who was restoring an Austin Healey and helped his grandfather restore a '56 Ford Crown Victoria, most of them thought a classic car was something from the '90s. So I guess I shouldn't have been surprised when I heard someone yelling to ask if the old oil had been drained out yet, and the reply was, "It's not a 15 or a 16, to which the shop manager replied, "It's Imperial." No reason I should be concerned just because they were thrown off by it not being metric. And they were able to get it off and replace my rubber O-ring in the process. The next hurdle turned out to be finding the oil filter. Not because it was in an unusual place, but because they simply didn't recognize it as an oil filter. This car doesn't use a one-piece filter. It has a canister with a long bolt that goes through the center, rubber O-rings for both the bolt and the canister, and a separate filter that fits inside of it. What some people used to refer to as the toilet paper roll type of filter. And eventually it was found and removed, but unsurprisingly, they didn't stock those type of filters to replace it. So I had them put the existing filter back on. Not a terribly big issue since the existing filter had less than 2,000 miles on it. But getting the thing back together and back on the car without leaking proved to be a challenge of its own that ended up involving at least 3 people. Mostly because the canister O-ring doesn't easily stay in place by itself, and on this engine sits at an angle under the block. And naturally, while all of this was going on, they asked if I wanted them to check my other fluids. Sure, why not? Power steering fluid? Easy enough. Brake fluid? No twist cap, so no. Coolant? Well, there's no overflow on these vehicles, so the only way to check the coolant is to pop the radiator cap off a hot radiator. So, not really. Transmission fluid? Sure, once they found the dipstick. And I asked them to top off the washer fluid. Of course, then I had to explain to them that it was the bag hanging off the inner fender well. Then they asked me if it had AC, and when I told them no, they asked me what that big pump was on the front, and I said, "That's a generator." And I asked them if they could lube that for me, and they looked at me like I was asking for blinker fluid. They checked my air filter, which could have used a change, but a round, semi-generic air filter wasn't something that they had in stock. Then they asked me if my windshield wiper blades needed change, and I said, "Sure, if you've got refill blades," which they misunderstood, until they discovered that the existing chrome pieces didn't just snap off to be replaced by some disposable plastic thing. In the end, I did get my oil changed, but not the filter. I got my transmission fluid topped off, and I got my chassis lubed at 18 points, which is great because I'm not even sure where my grease gun is. And it was all done in less than 2 hours for just over $25. Was it worth it? Absolutely. Would I do it again? Probably not. But I do appreciate them trying and being good sports about the whole thing.